Tiana Brooks came to court that morning to do her job, lead an internal investigation against 3 officers accused of misconduct. But before she could even walk through the doors, those same officers stopped her on the sidewalk, mocked her skin color, searched her bag, and humiliated her in public, assuming she was just someone who didn't belong. What they didn't know was that she was their superior, and in less than 30 minutes, she'd be the one deciding their fate. Can justice be served when the enforcers of the law are the ones breaking it? If this story already makes you think, give it a like and share it with someone. Now let me tell you what really happened inside that courtroom. She parked her car 2 blocks down from the courthouse. Nothing flashy, just a faded gray sedan with a government tag that no one ever bothered to notice. Tiana Brooks stepped out, her black slacks, neatly pressed blouse, plain but clean, hair pulled back in a bun like she always wore it when things were about to get serious. She carried a leather folder, worn but organized, tucked under one arm. She wasn't running late. In fact, she always arrived 15 minutes early. It was a habit she picked up years ago when she learned that showing up early meant you saw things others missed. Today, she didn't expect anyone would notice her, and that was the point. She reached the bottom steps of the courthouse, eyes calm, steps steady until the shout came. "Hey, hold up!" a voice barked from her left. 3 officers stood at the side entrance. Not the main gate, not the place they sent the clean-suited lawyers through. No, this was the unofficial checkpoint, the one where judgment came before questions. Sergeant Rick Halpern took the lead. Broad shoulders, buzz cut. That walk, like the sidewalk, belonged to him. He eyed her up and down like she'd walked onto the wrong movie set. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked. The ma'am wasn't respectful. It was loaded, sarcastic, sharp-edged. Tiana didn't break stride. She was still 6 steps from the door when the second voice joined in. Chad Vickers leaned against a concrete pillar, one hand on his belt, the other gripping a takeaway coffee. Or maybe she's here to mop the floors. What do you think? Rick Darren Lowe, the youngest of the 3, stood off to the side. His jaw was tight. He wasn't laughing, but he wasn't saying anything either. Tiana stopped. Not because she was intimidated, she wasn't, but because she knew what this was. And more importantly, she knew exactly where it was going. Rick stepped forward, hand near his holster, not threatening, not yet, but postured. "You got business in that building, I do." Tiana answered, voice low but firm. He raised an eyebrow. Mind showing some ID. She calmly reached for her purse. Rick immediately shifted. Slowly. "Let's not make this complicated." She paused, looked him dead in the eye, then opened her bag and handed him the first thing he asked for. He barely glanced at the card. Tiana Brooks. Doesn't ring a bell. He handed it to Chad. Chad didn't look either. "Name's not on the DA's calendar," he said, though he hadn't checked anything. "You here for court support? Victim advocate, maybe?" Tiana didn't answer. Rick folded his arms. "You think anyone's gonna let you walk in there dressed like that and not ask questions?" And that's when Chad delivered it, the one line meant to cut. "Let's be real. You don't look like someone who belongs inside a courtroom, unless it's on the defendant's side." Darren shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking from Tiana to Rick, then to the courthouse door. Still, Tiana said nothing. She let the silence linger. Rick stepped forward again. "You haven't answered me. What exactly are you doing here?" She didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just said quietly, "You have no idea where you're standing." There was no anger in her voice, no raised tone, just a calm certainty that did more damage than yelling ever could. And for a half second, just a flicker, Rick looked confused, like someone had said something in a language he'd heard before but never really understood. Tiana walked past them without waiting for permission. She didn't need it, and they had no idea who she was. But they were about to find out. Rick didn't like to be ignored, especially not by a quiet black woman who walked past him like his words meant nothing. So just a few steps before Tiana reached the courthouse door, he moved again, quick and sharp, cutting off her path. "I said, let me see your bag." His voice wasn't loud, but it had that bark beneath it, the kind that didn't wait for permission. Tiana paused. She could have kept walking. She should have. But she knew how this would play out. If she pushed forward, it would escalate. And it wasn't time. Not yet. So slowly, deliberately, she handed him her shoulder bag. Rick didn't ask. He just started digging through it like it was his own. Chad leaned against the wall, sipping his coffee, half watching, half smirking. Brooks. Brooks, he muttered as Rick flipped through her documents. Then, with mock surprise, Rick pulled one out and held it up in the air. "Look at this," he said loud enough for people across the sidewalk to hear. Summons. T. Brooks, Inspector Internal Affairs Division. He chuckled. "You playing dress up this morning," Chad nearly spit out his coffee. Wait. Inspector." He looked Tiana over, slow and disrespectful. "I thought Brooks was a man's name." Tiana didn't respond. Not a word. Not a twitch. She just stood there, eyes steady like a mountain unmoved by weather. Darren Lowe took a step forward, the youngest of the three. His voice came out hesitant. "Rick, maybe we should—" Rick didn't even look at him. One sharp glance from the sergeant and Darren stepped back like a scolded rookie. People were starting to look now. A few passers-by had slowed down. A lawyer hustling inside did a double take, then kept walking like she hadn't seen a thing. That was the rule, don't get involved. But someone did stop. Across the street, a teenage girl, brown-skinned, maybe 16, held up her phone. She wasn't trying to be sneaky. She was recording. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her face was set, brave, angry. Rick noticed her and immediately turned his full attention away from Tiana. "Hey," he barked, walking toward the girl. "Put that down right now." The girl didn't move, didn't blink. "I said put it down. You want to get charged with obstruction." Still, she kept recording. Just her, the officers, and her phone locked in a standoff. Darren stepped in. "Rick, chill." Rick's voice dropped, but the threat in it didn't. "One more step and she's in cuffs. Don't test me." Tiana didn't say anything. She didn't tell the girl to stop, didn't tell Rick to back off. She simply watched, measured. Then, from inside the building behind a pane of glass near the security desk, someone else was watching. Zuri Moore, clerk, mid-20s, smart eyes, quiet demeanor. She wasn't new to this building, but she'd never seen anything like what was happening outside. Her breath caught as she watched Rick flip through the papers in Tiana's bag. Then she saw the name on the document he held up, T. Brooks, Inspector. Her face changed. She stepped closer to the glass. For a second, she looked like she wanted to run out there, but she didn't. She waited. She watched. Back on the sidewalk, Rick turned toward Tiana again. He held her document up like a dirty napkin. "You trying to play somebody today? Wearing plain clothes, showing up like you're undercover. You think this is funny?" Chad chuckled. "She probably printed that thing at home, found a badge template online and ran with it." No one else laughed. Darren looked like he wanted the sidewalk to open and swallow him whole. Tiana reached forward and gently took the document back. Didn't grab, didn't glare, just reclaimed what was hers. Rick let it go but didn't move. "You need to answer me," he said. "Why are you really here?" She held his gaze, unflinching. Then, in the calmest, most even tone imaginable, she said, "You don't get to ask me that." There it was, a line drawn in stone, not shouted, not snarled, just placed gently in the air, unmoving and undeniable. Rick blinked. For the first time since the encounter began, his confidence faltered. It was only a flicker, but it was real. Then Tiana stepped to the side, walked past him, and reached for the courthouse door. He didn't stop her this time. No one did. Inside, Zuri stepped back from the glass and whispered to herself, "Inspector Brooks." Her voice held a mix of realization and awe. Not fear, not pity. respect. Out on the sidewalk, the teenage girl Isabella finally stopped recording. She wasn't sure why she had, only that it suddenly felt like the moment had ended. But something else was beginning. The sidewalk felt quieter, the air heavier. Rick stood frozen still, holding his authority like a broken shield. He had no idea. None of them did. But they were about to find out. The moment Tiana stepped inside the courthouse, the noise of the outside world faded. No more shouting. No more coffee-fueled laughter from the sidewalk. Just chilled air, polished stone, and that distant hum of printers and hallway doors swinging shut. She walked slowly, not because she was unsure, but because timing mattered. Always had. No one looked twice at her. Not the guards, not the clerks, not the people lined up for badges. She blended in. Just another woman in plain clothes with a folder under her arm. And that suited her perfectly. The hallway to internal affairs wasn't well lit. Not neglected, just avoided. Like a place people passed quickly without wanting to explain why they were there. As Tiana turned the corner, a voice called out behind her. "Ma'am?" She turned. It was the young black woman from behind the glass Zuri. Zuri approached cautiously, her badge clipped to a faded lanyard clipboard still in hand. There was worry on her face, but not fear. She looked like someone who cared even when she didn't have to. "I saw what happened outside," Zuri said softly. "Are you okay?" Tiana nodded. "I'm all right." Zuri hesitated. "Do you need legal support? I can find someone to walk with you if you'd like." There was no judgment in her voice, no overstepping, just quiet, honest concern. Tiana smiled gently. "That won't be necessary. I'm exactly where I need to be." Zuri tilted her head a little unsure. Before she could ask more, Tiana gave her a kind look. "Thank you, though." And then she walked on calm and steady. Down the hall inside the operations office, two clerks sat behind a desk cluttered with folders, snack wrappers, and a broken stapler. Phones rang once or twice, nobody picked up. "State inspector still not here," one of them muttered. The others skimmed through the roster on a monitor. "Nope, just got the name T. Brooks. No title, no photo. Honestly, I pictured some middle-aged guy with a mustache. Same. Probably wears those short-sleeved dress shirts with pens in the pocket." The first clerk laughed. Neither of them looked up as Tiana passed their open doorway. They didn't recognize the name. They didn't recognize the face. But they would. Zuri stood frozen for a beat, watching Tiana disappear around the corner. There was something about the way she moved, quiet, deliberate, like someone with a mission. Zuri didn't know her name, not yet. But something inside her said, "This woman isn't here by accident." Tiana reached the base of the staircase that led up to the third floor, where internal hearings were held behind closed doors. She paused only for a moment, then climbed without hesitation. She didn't need directions. She knew the building. She knew the room. She knew who was already waiting inside. From where she stood, Zuri caught one last look. Tiana's shoulders straight, folder in hand, her expression unreadable, but calm. Not the calm of silence, the calm of certainty. And slowly, something shifted in Zuri's eyes. Confusion gave way to realization. Realization gave way to respect. She didn't know exactly what Tiana Brooks had come here to do, but she was about to find out. And so was everyone else. The internal hearing room wasn't fancy, just 4 walls, 2 flags, and a long oak table too big for the space. The fluorescent lights buzzed low overhead. One clock ticked louder than it should have. Rick Halpern leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, boot tapping against the floor. His badge lay clipped to his belt, like a promise no one dared question. Chad Vickers leaned over, grinning. "You think this T. Brooks guy is going to be one of those old-timers? You know, gray hair, suspenders, smells like cough drops." Rick snorted. "Bet he still carries a flip phone." Even Darren Lowe chuckled softly, though his laugh didn't last long. They weren't nervous. Not really. Just irritated they had to sit through this whole thing. Some complaint, some formality. Internal reviews never stuck. Always some desk jockey behind the curtain miles away from real work. Rick looked toward the empty chair across the table and muttered, "Let's get this over with." The door clicked, and then it opened. She walked in. Slow, silent, measured. Tiana Brooks stepped into the room wearing a calm that didn't need to speak louder than a whisper. Her badge hung from a lanyard, silver letters, clear as daylight, Inspector T. Brooks, State Internal Affairs. No one moved. Not a breath. Not a blink. Rick froze mid-shift in his seat. His jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. Chad's smirk drained off his face like someone had flipped a switch. Color rose up his neck fast and ugly. Darren dropped his eyes to the floor. He didn't want to see her, didn't want to be seen. Tiana didn't rush. She walked to her chair, placed her folder down gently, and looked at them each one. No anger, no sarcasm, no vengeance, just clarity. And that was worse. She sat down, adjusted the microphone in front of her, and said with the kind of composure that cuts deeper than yelling ever could, "Gentlemen, let's begin." If there was a heartbeat in the room, it stuttered. Rick cleared his throat, straightened his spine like posture might rewrite what just happened. He didn't speak. Chad looked like he wanted to shrink into his uniform. For once, he had nothing clever to say. Darren shifted his hands under the table, thumb pressing into his palm, still silent. Tiana opened the file slowly. Her fingers never shook. She didn't mention the parking lot. Didn't remind them what they'd said. She didn't have to. Her presence did all the talking. Somewhere outside that room, Zuri was still trying to connect the dots. She'd just stepped into the hallway when she saw Tiana's name finally appear on the internal board. Inspector T. Brooks in session. Zuri stopped walking and whispered to herself, "Oh my God, she's the one." Back inside, the door closed with a soft click. And for the first time, the three officers, so loud before, so sure of themselves, sat in front of a woman they had mocked, touched, searched without cause. Now realizing they had done so to the very person who held their careers in her hands. But this wasn't revenge. It was accountability. And accountability, when done right, never has to raise its voice. That was the moment the room turned, not because of what she said, but because of who she was. And because they finally realized they had no idea who they were dealing with. The room had gone quiet, uncomfortably quiet. The kind of silence that makes a man sweat under his collar. Tiana opened her folder. No theatrics, no fanfare, just facts. She slid the first file to the center of the table. On the cover, Sergeant Rick Halpern. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. In the last 18 months, she said voice even you've been named in 6 separate reports involving threats of physical violence during stops and interrogations. 4 of those involved unarmed civilians. All 6 were closed without internal action. Rick's jaw twitched. All procedural. No one got hurt. Tiana's eyes lifted. Calm. Focused. No one got hurt. Officially, she replied. Then placed a printed screenshot beside the file, an internal complaint marked "Closed Insufficient Evidence." The margins were lined with officer statements. All anonymous. All identical. Next file. Officer Chad Vickers. She slid it forward, flipping to a page with stills from a video. A black homeless man, mumbling barefoot, holding a sign mocked by someone behind the camera. Tiana read aloud, "Smells like failure. Welcome to the free ride, folks." Posted on an anonymous TikTok account. Traced back to your work IP. Chad shifted in his seat. That was taken out of context. "No," Tiana cut in. "That is the context." His face flushed again. Not from shame, just from being caught. She didn't slow down. Last file. Darren Lowe. No physical reports, no viral videos, but words. Words that cut like glass. She turned the page. A complaint filed by a Latina woman 6 months ago. No arrest, no citation, just humiliation. She says you pulled her over, asked where she was from, then told her to go back to her country when she gave you attitude. Darren swallowed hard. I didn't mean it that way. Tiana leaned forward, voice quiet but razor sharp. What way did you mean it? He had no answer. And for a moment you could hear the hum of the ceiling lights again. Tiana closed the folder, then glanced toward the door. Let's bring in a witness. The side door opened and in walked Isabella, the young woman from the parking lot, barely 20, nervous but brave enough to stand upright under the fluorescent glare. She took a seat, hands folded tightly. Tiana nodded gently. Take your time. Isabella looked over at Rick and flinched. Tiana saw it. Everyone did. What happened outside that courthouse 2 weeks ago? She asked softly. Isabella cleared her throat. I saw Officer Halpern stop this guy. Black, maybe mid-30s. He wasn't yelling or anything, just sitting on the steps. Rick walked up to him, said he was loitering, told him to get lost. Tiana listened still, silent. Isabella continued. The man said, I'm waiting for my brother, that's all. And Rick told him, you keep talking, you'll disappear tonight. There was a beat of stunned stillness. Tiana looked at her gently. Were you afraid? Isabella nodded slowly. He looked at me after and said, you want to disappear too? I stopped filming. I left. I never told anyone. Until now. Tiana's voice dropped to a near whisper. Do you believe him? Isabella blinked. What do you mean? Tiana repeated calmly. When he said you'd disappear, did you believe he could do it? Isabella's voice cracked. Yes, I did. There was a pause. A long one. Then Tiana said almost to herself, so did I. Once. The words landed like a stone in a still lake. No yelling, no dramatics, just truth delivered like paper cuts. Small, sharp, accumulating until you couldn't ignore the sting. And across from her 3 officers sat suddenly smaller than they'd been when they walked in. Because for the first time, they weren't in control of the story. She was. There's a moment in every room, especially rooms like this, where the focus shifts. It's not when someone shouts. It's when someone speaks the truth. And the room leans in. Tiana leaned back slightly, folding her hands in front of her. The files were closed now. Her voice softened, but it didn't lose its power. I wasn't always an inspector, she began. I used to be a federal prosecutor. Chad looked up surprised. Darren blinked. Rick stared at the wall. Tiana continued slowly. I took a case once. An officer had shot an unarmed teenager, black 17, no record. The evidence wasn't perfect, but it was enough. I believed in the case. I pushed hard. She exhaled through her nose, quiet. And then everything stopped. They didn't fire me. That would have made noise. They just removed me. Quietly. No trial. No explanation. Just, you're being reassigned. And then, your credentials are under review. Then nothing. She paused. I lost my title, my apartment, even my health insurance. I lost people, 2 colleagues who wouldn't return my calls, friends who needed distance. No one said a word, and that's when I learned something, she said. There's more than one way to bury a person. She looked up, her gaze steady. But I'm still here. Silence. Then, for the first time since the hearing began, Darren Lowe shifted forward. His voice came low, hesitant. I saw it happen, he said. Not to you. But something like that. A friend of mine, black officer. He reported a sergeant once. Next thing I knew, he was working graveyard shifts in parking enforcement. Then he was gone. He swallowed hard. I didn't say anything. Tiana nodded without judgment. You kept quiet because you were scared, she said. And I get that. Fear is loud. It drowns out everything else. She let that hang for a beat. But here's what fear doesn't tell you, she added, her voice quieter now. Once you stay silent long enough, it stops being a choice. In the back of the room, Zuri stood near the doorway. She had no business being there, technically, but she didn't move. She couldn't. She'd heard stories about women like Tiana, but now she was watching one in real time, not on a screen, not in a book, real and human. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, because the world didn't need another witness crying in silence. It needed one who stayed. Tiana turned to the table again, but she wasn't looking at files anymore. She was looking at faces. Tired faces. Guilty ones. And ones that still didn't know how to feel. You think this job is about catching bad apples? She said. It's not. It's about recognizing when the tree itself is sick. No one interrupted her. Not now. She placed a final document on the table. Not a report. A photo. It was the teenager from her old case, smiling, before it all happened. I carry this, she said, tapping the image lightly. Every day. That was the weight. And now, they all felt it. Not just the guilt of what they'd done, but the grief of what they hadn't. Rick's boot tapped against the floor, slow and heavy, arms folded, jaw clenched. His voice when it came was low but soaked in rage. So that's what this is, huh? He spat. You came here just to tear me down, in front of everybody. Tiana didn't flinch. She stood exactly where she had stood at the start, unmoved, untrembling. Her eyes met his. I didn't come here to tear you down, she said softly. You did that the moment you decided to treat me like I didn't matter. Chad leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes bloodshot. Rick told us she was just another mouthy civilian, he said, half defensive, half regretful. He said she looked suspicious, that we needed to check her credentials. Then quieter, like the shame had finally caught up. I didn't think it would go this far. Rick turned to him, snapping, You followed orders like you're supposed to. But Chad's face crumbled. I followed hate, he said. Not orders. Then Darren stood, his badge still pinned to his chest. He looked tired, older than just an hour ago. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but it was the first time he truly spoke. Rick, he said, eyes locked. You remember my mom? Rick blinked. Years ago, that grocery store fight, Darren continued. That black woman you accused of stealing a purse? Rick opened his mouth, then closed it. Didn't remember. Didn't care. That was my mother, Darren said. You pushed her face into the concrete and told her, if you don't like it, go back to Africa. I was 12. I watched from the car. Silence. Real silence. Darren slowly removed his badge, held it in his palm, looked at it, then placed it down in front of Rick. It clinked softly against the wood. I can't wear that anymore, he said. I tried to forget. I stayed quiet. I buried it. But after what you did to Inspector Brooks, I remembered everything. Rick's lip curled. You're throwing away your career over this. He gestured toward Tiana like she was an inconvenience. Tiana didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because truth was loud even when whispered. But Rick wasn't done. You think you're better than me, huh? He barked at her, walking in here like some savior dragging all of us through the dirt. Tiana finally turned to him, slow and calm. Her voice was quieter than his, but 10 times heavier. No, Rick. I don't think I'm better than you. She took a step closer. Just one. But I do know the difference between justice and cruelty, and that's the line you chose to cross. Chad lowered his head. His hand trembled as he rubbed his eyes. I should have stopped it, he mumbled. I saw what we were doing. I saw her face. I still didn't stop. Then came a shift no one expected. Tiana sat down, folded her hands, and for the first time since the hearing started, she allowed herself to speak, not as an inspector, but as a woman who had carried too much for too long. You know, I used to believe the badge meant something, she said, voice steady. That if you worked hard, played by the rules, you could protect people. All people. She looked at Darren, then at Chad, then finally at Rick. But what good are rules if we only enforce them on the powerless? Rick rolled his eyes. Another speech. Of course. But Tiana didn't stop. She looked past him now, through him. You called me a stranger, treated me like an intruder. But I've been in this system longer than you've worn that badge. I prosecuted gang leaders, corrupt judges, and dirty officers until I tried to hold one of your own accountable. She paused, then said it plain. That's when they buried me. The room stilled. Chad looked like he couldn't breathe. Darren quietly wiped his eye. Even Zuri, watching through the glass outside, put her hand over her chest. Rick stood, chair scraping hard behind him. You're all cowards, he snapped. She manipulated you with a story. That's all she has, stories. But Tiana didn't even blink. Truth isn't manipulation, she said. It's just uncomfortable for the ones who've built comfort from silence. Rick stormed toward the door, but just before exiting he turned back. This isn't over, he muttered. Tiana stood too, still composed. She didn't glare. She didn't shout. She just looked at him and said calmly, It never is. That's why we fight. In the silence that followed, Darren placed a hand on Chad's shoulder. Zuri stepped quietly into the room, eyes wide, heart pounding. And somewhere far from this courtroom, another young black girl just clicked submit on her law school application. The room had grown quiet. The shouting had stopped. The denials, the excuses, all of it had faded. Now came the part everyone feared most. Judgment. And yet, it didn't come with a gavel slam or dramatic music. It came with a voice. Calm, clear, measured. Tiana stood once more. She didn't look angry. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired, but strong. After reviewing the conduct records and witness testimony, here are the recommendations. She paused just long enough to let silence fill the air. Sergeant Rick Halpern is to be permanently suspended from active duty, effective immediately. His conduct meets the threshold for federal referral. His file has already been forwarded. Rick sat frozen. He didn't yell, didn't protest, because deep down he knew this was coming long before today. He just thought no one would have the power or the will to say it out loud. Officer Chad Vickers, Tiana continued. While complicit, he's shown acknowledgement and remorse. He'll be placed on probationary status under mandatory supervision and racial sensitivity rehabilitation. Chad nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the table. No applause, no sympathy, just silence and the weight of accountability. Officer Darren Lowe. She looked at him. There was a softness in her voice now, not forgiveness, but recognition. Has voluntarily stepped away from duty and expressed intent to continue serving the public in a civilian capacity. Effective next month, he'll join the department's community engagement team. Darren looked up surprised. But she nodded once, firm but fair. It wasn't mercy, it was justice, earned. Tiana took a deep breath. And then she said the words that didn't come from a rule book, but from the bruised, buried places within her. Let me be clear, she said. I didn't come here to win. There is no winning. Not when we're still cleaning up wounds that never should have happened. She looked down at the reports, the photos, the testimonies, then closed the folder. I didn't win today, she said again quietly this time. I just refused to keep losing. That's when it happened. Zuri, who had watched from the corner all morning, covered her mouth with one hand and cried, not out of grief, but because for the first time in her life justice felt real, not distant, not political, not filtered through some slogan on a billboard. Real, measured, human. The other observers sat in stunned silence. Some scribbled notes, others just watched Tiana, like they'd never seen a black woman stand that tall before. But the ones who knew, who really knew, felt something else entirely. Pride. As the room emptied, Tiana stayed behind. She collected her papers quietly, then noticed Zuri still standing there, eyes red, shoulders trembling. Tiana smiled gently. You okay? Zuri nodded, but the words came choked. That was the first time I ever saw someone look like me hold that kind of power and use it to heal, not hurt. Tiana paused. That hit somewhere deep. She walked over, touched her arm gently, and said, Then don't let it be the last. Outside, the sunlight was softer than it had been that morning. And as Tiana stepped through the doors where she had once been humiliated, no one stopped her. No one questioned her. Because now they knew. The hall outside the hearing room was nearly empty now. The buzz was gone. The tension, the outrage, it had drained away, leaving behind something quieter. Stillness. Reflection. And in the middle of that stillness, Tiana stood by the window watching the slow rhythm of the city move on as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Footsteps padded softly behind her. Then a small hand wrapped gently around her fingers. It was Isabella, the same teenage girl who had once stood frozen with a phone camera and trembling hands. Now she looked up steady. You made me not afraid anymore, she whispered. Tiana turned, eyes softening. She crouched a little, cupping Isabella's cheek like a mother might, not with pity, but with pride. And you, she said, voice warm, will make sure someone else isn't afraid either. Isabella blinked fast, fighting emotion. Then in a heartbeat she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around Tiana. The hug wasn't long, but it held years of silence, unspoken, now released. A few feet away, Zuri stood watching. She'd stayed back through it all, too unsure, too careful. But now her voice broke through the hush. If I chose this path, would you teach me? Tiana turned, surprised by the rawness in her voice. Zuri stepped forward, eyes wide, not with fear, but hunger. Not the rules. Not the books, she added quickly. I mean the real things. Like how to hold steady when they look at you like you don't belong. How to speak when they expect you to be quiet. Tiana didn't answer right away. She walked over slowly, then placed both hands gently on Zuri's shoulders. No one can teach you how to stand up, she said, but I can remind you that you always have the right to. Zuri's breath caught. Because it wasn't a lesson, it was a handoff, a quiet, powerful one, like someone lighting a candle in another's hand. No ceremony, no applause, just a passing of courage. Behind them, the doors to the hearing room creaked shut. Echoes of that morning faded into memory. But what lingered was something more durable than punishment or scandal. It was conviction. Isabella stood beside Zuri now, both of them still young, but not small. Tiana looked at them, their eyes, their posture. There was no mistaking it. They would carry this forward. Not loudly, not for credit, but clearly. And when the time came, they would become the next voice in the room no one expected. Or maybe the voice everyone needed. She turned to go. The sun was lower now, casting long golden lines across the floor. Justice had been served. But more importantly, hope had been passed on. And for Tiana Brooks, that was the only kind of justice that ever mattered. The courthouse steps had never felt this crowded, not with this kind of silence. No sirens, no shouting, just the soft hum of camera shutters, the buzz of microphones being adjusted, and the murmurs of people who weren't sure if they were witnessing an ending or a beginning. Tiana Brooks stood at the top of those steps, the setting sun at her back. Her blazer was still neat, her badge still clipped, but something about her felt different now. She wasn't just walking out of a hearing, she was walking out whole. A young reporter stepped forward, clutching a recorder. She was polite, careful. Inspector Brooks, do you have any message for those watching today? Maybe especially for young women of color. Tiana glanced toward the woman's eyes, not her mic, not the press badge, just her eyes, and she said calmly but clearly, "You don't need power to be heard. You just need to stop apologizing for speaking." The air around them shifted. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. like someone who had bled the truth for too long to bother wrapping it in soft ribbons. Somewhere in the crowd, a little girl clung to her mother's hand. About 6, maybe 7. Braids neat, Sunday dress, still wrinkled from the long wait. She pulled at her mom's sleeve, whispering just loud enough. "Mommy, is she the boss?" Tiana heard her, and for the first time that day, her face broke into a real, full smile. She walked over through the cameras, through the quiet, and knelt so the girl could look her in the eyes. "No, baby," she said, voice low and warm. "But I made the rules today." The little girl's eyes widened. Then she nodded slowly, as if she understood something too big for her age, but just right for her heart. Tiana stood up again, taller than before. She looked over the crowd, not above them, not beneath them, but through them, like she was looking at a future still unsure of itself, and saying, "You'll be okay. Just don't flinch." And then she didn't raise a fist, didn't bow her head. She simply turned and walked. Not fast, not proud, just steady. Later that night, the clip would go viral. Not because she cried, not because she yelled, but because she didn't need to. The final line. "But I made the rules today" would echo across news anchors, podcasts, and late-night commentary. But for those who were there, it wasn't the quote that stayed with them. It was the silence after. The kind that only comes when you've just seen something true. Inside the courthouse, the chairs had been cleared. The floors had been swept. But upstairs, in the empty hearing room, one laminated badge sat on the long table. T. Brooks, State Internal Affairs. Zuri would find it the next morning. She wouldn't move it. She'd just sit in that chair for a while. Let it remind her of what it meant to be seen, to belong, to dare. And out there in the city, across the state and far beyond, 3 officers were learning what accountability really felt like. One was rebuilding, one was breaking, and one had finally decided to start over from scratch. Tiana Brooks. She didn't ask for applause, didn't stick around for headlines, didn't build a brand, because she already knew what mattered. Justice isn't something you perform, it's something you live, even when no one's looking. Some stories aren't just about justice, they're about courage, about someone choosing to speak when silence feels safer. Tiana didn't walk into that courtroom looking for revenge. She walked in to remind us, you don't need a title to stand for what's right. Sometimes all it takes is refusing to stay silent. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories. Your support gives our team the heart to keep creating stories that matter, stories that echo long after the final word. Because here at Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe truth hits harder when it's human. And that's what we'll keep bringing story by story. See you in the next one. Stay brave, stay loud, stay human,